Welcome back to Dirty Laundry, the place where we do not just air the secrets, we deep clean them. Everyone has a little something they want to hide, a stain they cannot quite wash out. But here we totally embrace the mess. We dive into the most scandalous stories, hidden truths, and ultimate unfiltered drama. Grab your popcorn, sit back, and get ready. Because today our cycle is about to spin out of control. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button before we uncover what is really in the basket. What would you do if you watched your own child help a man try to destroy you? I am 71 years old, a keeper of a lighthouse on the coast of Maine, and I spent 40 years finding the truth inside disasters that the sea had already chewed to pieces. I thought I had seen every way a human heart can break. Then, at 13 minutes past 2 in the morning, I saw my daughter holding a light in the fog for the man who was trying to take everything I had, including her. He called me the old fossil. He thought I was as good as dead. He had no idea that my late wife, from beyond the grave, had already set a trap that would teach all of us the difference between justice and revenge. Stay with me to the end. The light has something to show you. It began with a sound I had taught myself, long ago, never to sleep through. The motion sensor on my lighthouse stairs woke me the way the sea used to wake me, all at once, with no soft border between sleep and knowing. I have trained my body for 40 years to come awake without flailing. So I did not sit up. I did not gasp. I reached for the tablet on the nightstand, and I opened the camera feed, and I let the cold gray light of that little screen fall across my face. What I saw stopped the breath in my chest. My daughter stood in the fog outside my workshop, holding a flashlight pointed at the ground. Margaret, my Maggie, 39 years old now. Though in that moment she looked like the girl I once carried sleeping up these same rocks. She was turning her head left and right, watching the lane that climbs from the road, and I understood the posture before my heart would let me name it. She was standing watch and kneeling at the workshop door, working a thin bar against the lock I had set there myself, was her husband, Damien Vance. I heard them through the little speaker, thinned by distance and the hush of the water. "Hurry," Maggie whispered. He laughed at her, low and easy, the way a man laughs when he has never once paid the price for anything. "Relax," he said. "The old fossil sleeps like the dead. I have watched him 3 nights running. He does not stir. The old fossil. That was the name he had for me when he thought no walls were listening. I had heard it before, secondhand, and I had filed it away the way I once filed every small detail at a wreck site, knowing that nothing is ever truly small. I lay there in the dark and felt something move through me. And it was not panic. Panic is what amateurs feel when they lose control of a situation. I had not lost control of a situation in 4 decades. What moved through me was colder and heavier than that. It was the particular cold I had felt only a handful of times in my life. Standing on a fog-bound deck at dawn, looking down at the bodies the sea had given back. A stillness that goes all the way to the bone. The stillness of a man who already understands that something is gone and will not be coming back. My daughter was helping a man break into my home, not allowing it, not looking away from it, helping it, lighting the path for it. She had chosen a side. Somewhere in the months I had not been watching closely enough. And the side she had chosen was not mine. I could have ended it in 5 minutes. I could have thrown on the floodlights, walked out onto the rocks in my robe, and shouted them off my property. I could have called Sheriff Bingham and had a cruiser there before the tide turned. But I had spent my whole working life learning a hard and unglamorous truth, and it held me to that bed as surely as a hand on my chest. The crime you can see is not the crime you can prove. If I moved now, all I had was an old man's word against a charming son-in-law who would smile at a deputy and say he had permission, that he was only checking the building for his confused father-in-law. That poor Silas forgets these things now. Maggie would weep. The story would bend around me like water around a stone, and I would be the stone they left behind. So I watched for 11 minutes while Damien failed to beat the lock I had built, while my daughter shivered in the cold and checked her phone and checked the lane, while the fog rolled in off the bay and swallowed the bottom of the light. And then they gave it up for the night and walked back toward the road, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. And that was the part that I will carry to my own grave. I set the tablet down. I did not sleep again. And as I lay there listening to the foghorn out on the point, a memory surfaced that I had kept submerged for 4 years. Because grief is a kind of water, and some things you simply do not let float back up. 3 weeks before the cancer took her, my wife Cora pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. Her fingers were thin by then, all knuckle and tendon, but her grip was a vice. "Promise me," she said. "Don't open this until they show you who they really are." I had laughed, gently, the way you laugh at someone you love who is frightened and dying. I told her no one was going to show me anything. I told her our family was solid as the granite under the tower. She just looked at me with those clear gray eyes that had read me for 45 years. And she said, "Silas, you have spent your life seeing what other men miss. The only thing you have never been able to read is your own blood." I thought it was the medicine talking. I put the envelope in the strongbox in the lamp room at the top of the light, and I let 4 years of fog roll over it. But lying there in the dark, with the print of my son-in-law's voice still in my ears, calling me a fossil, calling me as good as dead, I finally understood that my wife had not been afraid and she had not been confused. She had been doing the thing she did better than anyone I ever knew. She had been reading the water ahead of the boat. She had seen this coming for years, and quietly, in the time she had left, she had built something to protect me from beyond the grave. I just did not yet know what it was. Morning came up gray and slow over the bay, the way it does in Maine in late October, and I took my coffee out onto the gallery that wraps the base of the light. I did not drink it. I let it go cold in my hands while I looked at the workshop door 60 feet down the path, and I made myself study it the way I would have studied anything else. Not as a wounded father, as an investigator. There were fresh scratches around the keyhole, bright metal showing through the weathered brass, catching what little sun there was. The third set in 11 days. I had counted them the way I once counted scorch marks on a hull, because numbers do not lie and feelings do, and a man my age has to be careful which one he trusts. For 40 years, I worked marine casualty investigation for the United States Coast Guard. When a vessel went down off this coast, when an engine room burned or a man went over the side in weather, they sent me. My job was to walk into chaos that the ocean had already chewed and rearranged, and to find the one true sequence of events hidden inside it. I did not investigate, exactly. People always said it wrong. I reconstructed. I took the wreckage the sea handed back and I made it tell me, in order, what had truly happened and who had truly done it. I learned 3 things in those 4 decades, and I have never had cause to unlearn them. The first is that the wreck always remembers, even when the witnesses forget or lie. The second is that the people who cause disasters almost always believe they are smarter than the evidence. And the third, the one that mattered most now, is this. A security system is not a lock. A lock is just a suggestion. The real security system is the man who is watching, and the records he keeps, and his patience. So 11 days ago, after the first set of scratches appeared, I had not bought a bigger padlock. I had done what I knew how to do. I had installed cameras, not the obvious kind that sit on a pole and announce themselves. I had learned my trade in an era when the best evidence was the evidence no one knew was being gathered. I tucked small units into the eaves of the workshop and under the gallery rail of the tower, the kind that see in the dark, that wake to the heat and motion of a human body but sleep through a passing raccoon or the wind off the water. A single red pinpoint blinked once every 8 seconds, and if you did not already know to look for it, it was just another shadow among the shingles. For 11 days they had been recording, time-stamped, to a drive in the lamp room, building me something that was not a family argument, something that was a record. I went back inside and climbed the iron stairs that spiral up the inside of the tower. 91 steps, the same climb I have made most days of my life. At the top, in the lamp room where the great lens used to turn before the Coast Guard automated her, I keep a small desk. On that desk sat a leather-bound book Cora had given me on our 40th anniversary, the year before she got sick. The pages were still blank. I had never been able to think of anything worthy enough to write in a gift from her hand. I uncapped my pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote 4 words: workshop, intrusion, evidence log. Below that, I wrote the dates and the times the cameras had given me, the 28th and the 2nd and the 7th, and then the night just passed. The 13th. At 13 minutes past 2 in the morning. 3 names beside them: Damien Vance, Margaret Hartwell Vance, and a third line I left empty, because every job I ever worked had at least one player who had not shown his face yet, and I had learned to leave him a place at the table before I knew his name. It is a strange thing to write your own daughter into an evidence log in the same steady hand you once used for strangers. The pen did not shake. That frightened me more than anything else that morning. 40 years of discipline had made my hand obey me even when my heart was somewhere down at the bottom of the bay. I sat there a long while with the gray light coming through the storm windows, and I let myself think about Cora, because the work made me think of her, the way it always did. She had been a maritime lawyer, sharp as a gaff hook, the only person I ever met who could out-argue me on the things I knew best. People used to say we were a matched pair, the man who reconstructed the disaster and the woman who decided who would pay for it. She used to laugh at that. She would say, "Silas, you find the truth, and I make the world act like it matters. Without me, you are just a man alone in a tower, knowing things. A man alone in a tower, knowing things." That was exactly what I had become. And I understood now that the thing she had built before she died, whatever waited inside that envelope, was her way of reaching forward through 4 years of fog to stand beside me one more time, to make the world act like the truth mattered. Even after she was gone, but I was not ready to climb to the strongbox and break that seal. Not yet. A good investigator does not rush to the conclusion. He lets the evidence accumulate until it can carry weight in a courtroom. not just in a heart. I capped the pen. I closed the book. And I looked out the lamp room glass toward the lane. Because I already knew, the way you know weather is turning, what the rest of this day would bring. The man who was casing my property would not stay away. He would come to my door before sundown with concern in his voice and calculation in his eyes. He would smile at me, and I would smile back and pour him coffee and let him believe the fossil suspected nothing at all. He arrived at 20 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, carrying a foil-covered dish like a man bearing tribute. And his car was the first lie he told me. It was a new German thing, low and black. The kind of car a man buys with money he does not have. Parked beside my old truck on the gravel like a shark beside a dory. Damien Vance climbed out, stretched, looked up at the tower the way an appraiser looks at a building he has already decided to sell, and then arranged his face into warmth before he turned toward the door. "Silas," he called out. "I brought you something. Maggie made too much last night. She worries about you out here all alone." I let him in. I have shaken hands with men who had let other men drown to save themselves an inquiry, and I had smiled at every one of them across a table while the record built quietly in the background. Damien Vance was no harder to stand beside than any of those. I took the dish. I thanked him, and I put the kettle on. Because that is what you do. And because a kettle gives a man something to do with his hands, while his eyes do the real work. He moved through my front room the way water finds the low places. Easy, unhurried, touching nothing, missing nothing. I watched his reflection in the dark glass of the window over the sink while I waited for the water. His gaze went to the old roll-top desk, to the drawers of it, to the small floor safe in the corner that I keep precisely because men like him expect a man like me to keep one. It went up the iron stairs toward the lamp room and lingered there a half-second too long. Then it came back to me, and the warmth came back with it, snapped on like a porch light. "You know," he said, settling uninvited into Cora's chair, "I was talking to Maggie about this place. All these stairs, the damp. A man your age, Silas, with your knees. There are communities now. You would not believe them. Climate-controlled. Nurses on the grounds. A man could finally rest. I am resting fine." I told him. I poured the water over the leaves. "The lake keeps me company," I said, and then corrected myself. Because the mind plays small tricks on grief. The bay. The bay keeps me company." He caught the slip. I watched him catch it. Watched something flicker behind his eyes and get written down in whatever ledger he kept. The bad mirror of my own. "The bay," he repeated gently. "The way you correct a child." "Of course." He smiled. And that smile is the thing I want you to understand, because everything that came after grew out of it. It was not a cruel smile. Cruelty would have been easier to hate cleanly. It was a patient smile. It was the smile of a man who has already counted your days and found the number small, and feels he can afford to be kind to you in the meantime. We sat. He asked about my health, and whether the stairs ever made me dizzy, and whether I ever forgot things now. Names, dates, where I had put my keys. He asked it all wrapped in concern, soft as wool, and I gave him exactly what he wanted. A little vagueness, a pause before a date. A hand that wandered to my temple as though chasing a word that had swum away. I have spent my life reading liars, and the second half of that skill, the half no one talks about, is knowing how to be read. I let him read a frightened, fading old man, because that was the man he needed to find. And a satisfied predator stops looking closely. He stayed 47 minutes, long enough to seem devoted, not so long that his leaving would seem like flight. He clasped my shoulder at the door, 2 firm pats, the way you would gentle a horse you intended to sell. And he told me to think about those communities, and that family takes care of family. Then the black car went down the lane and the gravel settled, and the bay went back to its gray breathing. I climbed the 91 steps to the lamp room. I sat at the desk and pulled the camera feed onto the screen, and I scrolled it back to the minutes after he had left the house but before that engine ever turned over. There he was, 26 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. Damien Vance, standing at my workshop door, where no errand of his had any business taking him. His phone was up. He was photographing the lock. He took his time about it. 2 angles of the mechanism, the hinges, the weathered sign that reads private property. He framed each one carefully, the way a man documents a thing he means to defeat. And once he glanced back over his shoulder toward the house to be sure the fossil was not at the window. I watched it 3 times. I have watched 10,000 hours of footage in my life and learned to read a body the way other men read a page, and there was no innocence anywhere in his. This was not a worried son-in-law. This was reconnaissance. A man does not photograph a lock he intends to knock on. I opened the ledger and I wrote it down. The time, the act, the angles. And I left the room and went down and sat a long while in the dark as the foghorn started up out on the point. Because I knew now that this was not a question of whether but of when, and that the when was coming fast. What I did not know, sitting there in the dark with his coffee cup still warm on the table, was that 3 nights later, at 13 minutes past 2 in the morning, I would learn the answer to the question I had been most afraid to ask. Not whether a stranger wanted what was mine, but who, inside my own blood, was helping him take it. 3 nights I waited, and on the 3rd, the sensor woke me again at 13 minutes past 2 in the morning. And this time I did not feel the cold come on slow. It was already there when I opened my eyes, as though some part of me had been lying awake inside the dark all along, waiting for the screen to confirm what I already knew. I have told you what I saw. The 2 figures in the fog. My daughter standing watch while her husband worked the lock. What I have not told you is what I did with the next 18 minutes. Because that is the part that matters, and it is the part a younger man could not have done. I lay still, and I watched. And I made myself an investigator instead of a father. Damien gave up on the workshop padlock the same way he had given up before. With a soft curse the microphone barely caught. But this time he did not retreat to the road. This time he tried the side door of the boathouse, the old one with the rusted hasp, and the hasp gave, because I had let it stay rusted on purpose. And he went inside with his flashlight sweeping ahead of him. Through the second camera, I watched the beam crawl across the hull of the skiff. Cora and I had built one slow summer, across the rows of paint cans, across the workbench, where I still keep her father's tools. He was looking for something. He was not finding it. He photographed a few things, opened a few drawers, and put them back not quite the way he had found them, which told me he had learned a little care, but not enough. And the whole time, Maggie stood her post in the cold. I want to be honest about what that did to me, because if I dress it up, it will not be true. And the only thing I have left worth keeping is the truth. It did not make me angry, not in those minutes. Anger is a hot thing, and what I felt was cold. I watched my daughter pull her coat tighter against the bay wind, watched her check her phone, check the lane, check her phone again, nervous, committed, a grown woman keeping watch so that a man could rob her own father. And I thought of a small girl on these same rocks who would not go to sleep until I had checked the closet twice, who held my hand on the dock for 30 years, who I taught to read the tides before she could read words. And I understood that the girl was gone, or buried so deep under something I could not yet see that she might as well have been gone, and that the cold I felt was grief wearing the clothes of patience. At 2 in the morning, Damien came out of the boathouse. Maggie killed her flashlight the instant he appeared. Fast, practiced, and they stood close together in the dark a moment. And he put his arm around her, and they walked up the lane to wherever they had left the car beyond my cameras. And I lay there in the ruins of my own house and did the hardest arithmetic of my life. Because here is what the world does not understand about an old man who once carried a federal badge. The thing I wanted, with every cell that was still mine, was to throw on the floods and walk out and end it. To stand in front of my daughter and say, "I see you. I know." The thing I wanted was the confrontation, the relief of being seen seeing. And the thing I had learned across 4 decades was that the confrontation is exactly what the guilty are praying for, because it trades a case for an argument. If I confronted them now, what did I have footage of a son-in-law in a boathouse and a daughter holding a flashlight on property that bears my name? Damien would tell a deputy I had given him a key weeks ago and forgotten it. Maggie would cry and say they were worried, that they had come to check on me in the night because the poor man does not sleep, does not remember. The story would close over me like water. I had spent my whole working life watching guilty men walk free because some good and decent person moved too soon, on heat instead of proof. The crime you can see is not the crime you can prove. I had written that truth into 100 reports. I was not going to forget it now. On the one night it was finally mine to live by, so I did not move. I lay in the dark until the foghorn stopped and the sky went the color of an old nickel. And then I rose and climbed the 91 steps and opened the ledger and wrote it all down. The boathouse, the hasp, the 18 minutes, the arm around her shoulders, and under Margaret Hartwell Vance, in the same steady hand that still would not shake. I wrote 4 words that cost me more than anything I have ever written. Active participant, not coerced. I did not yet know how wrong those last 2 words were. I would learn it later, and the learning would nearly break me. But on that gray morning, all I had was what the evidence showed me. And the evidence showed a woman keeping watch of her own free will. And a good investigator writes what the evidence shows and lets the truth correct him later. I made coffee. I did not drink. I sat at the desk as the light came up over the water. I had a record now, real and time-stamped. The beginning of something that could stand in a courtroom instead of dying in a kitchen. I had patience, which is the only weapon that never jams. And I had 2 months, give or take, before a man like Damien would make his move in the open. What I did not have, sitting there with my cold coffee and my cold heart, was any idea that he had already made his first move against me. That it had nothing to do with the workshop or the boathouse at all. That it was happening, even then, in a doctor's office 40 miles down the coast, with my name typed at the top of a lie. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I telephoned Dolores Quint, and she answered on the second ring with the clipped, awake voice of a woman who has spent 40 years turning other people's chaos into airtight paper. Dolores was 64, the trust and estate attorney my Cora had chosen years ago, in ways I was only beginning to understand. She and Cora had been friends since law school, two sharp women in a profession that did not want them, and they had never stopped sharpening each other. "Silas," she said. 7 in the morning. Either someone died, or you have finally decided to do something foolish. Which is it? Neither, I said. A question. Hypothetical. If a man wanted to have someone declared mentally incompetent to take control of his affairs, how long would that take? Start to finish, there was a silence on the line. And it was not the silence of a woman calculating. It was the silence of a woman who had been waiting a long time for a particular phone call and had just heard it arrive. 2 months, she said at last. Less if they have a physician's report claiming decline. Less still if they can argue the person is in immediate danger to himself. Silas, why are you asking me this at 7 in the morning? Just a hypothetical, I said. Thank you. Dolores. Silas. I hung up before she could finish my name. Because I was not ready. And because a man does not hand his lawyer half a case. I would give her all of it or none of it. And I did not yet have all of it. But I climbed the 91 steps and I opened the leather book. And I made it real. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page and beneath it, in block letters, 3 words: evidence, log, begun. And then I wrote down the phone call itself, the time and the question and her answer. Because in my experience, the first entry in any honest record is the moment the investigator admits to himself that there is something to investigate. 2 days later, the telephone rang, and it was a clinic 40 miles down the coast, in a town I had no reason to visit, calling to confirm my appointment for a cognitive evaluation that I had never made. The young woman on the line read me the details in a bright voice. The appointment had been scheduled by my son-in-law, Mr. Damien Vance, who had explained that I was experiencing increasing confusion and was unable to manage the call myself. I told her I would be there. Then I sat with the receiver humming in my hand and felt something close to admiration. The cold, professional kind you feel for an enemy who is good at his work. He was not waiting 2 months. He was building the physician's report that would cut the 2 months to nothing. He had simply forgotten, the way arrogant men always forget, that the subject of his evaluation had spent 40 years sitting across tables from people who underestimated him. I drove down myself, because curiosity has always been stronger in me than pride, and I wanted to see the shape of the thing he was building. The doctor was a woman of about 50 named Helena Frost, gray at the temples, with the unhurried manner of someone who has told a great many people a great many hard truths. She sat me down and apologized that the referral had been a little unusual, and then she began. She asked me the day of the week and what I had eaten for breakfast. Wednesday, I told her, and black coffee and 2 eggs, scrambled soft, and I added that I had taken my blood pressure tablet at 6:30, the same as every morning for 9 years. She made a note. She asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s, and I gave it to her without stopping. 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, and watched her pen slow on the page. She had me draw a clock showing 10 minutes past 11. She had me name the governor, recite my address, repeat back 3 words after 5 minutes of other talk. Apple, harbor, candle, which I returned to her in order, and then, because something in me could not resist, in reverse. After 35 minutes, she set down her clipboard and looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, "you have scored at the very top of your age range. Your recall is intact. Your reasoning is excellent. I see no sign of cognitive decline of any kind. None. I could have told you that," I said. "I am sure you could have." She paused, and her eyes went to the door, and her voice dropped a register. "Your son-in-law submitted paperwork with this referral, a history. He describes a man who forgets appointments, who gets lost driving familiar roads, who leaves the stove burning. He describes a man who does not exist. The man in front of me and the man in those pages are not the same person." I asked her, very quietly, whether she intended to sign anything based on that history. "I do not sign fraudulent documents, Mr. Hartwell," she said, and for the first time there was steel under the calm. 40 years in medicine, and I have never put my name to a lie. And I am not going to start with a man who can count backward by 7s faster than I can. I thanked her. I meant it more than she knew. And as I gathered my coat, she said one more thing, gently, the way you warn someone standing too close to a cliff in the fog. "Mr. Hartwell, whatever your son-in-law is trying to do, he came here believing it would be easy. Men like that do not stop when one door closes. They find a door that will open. Be careful which doors you leave unlocked." I walked out into the gray afternoon thinking she was right, and thinking too that Dr. Helena Frost had just become, without knowing it, the first witness in a case she could not yet see. But what she did not know, and what I did not yet know either, was just how much faster the next door would open, and what my own daughter would carry through it that very night, wrapped up warm and sweet in the shape of love. I learned what Damien did in that clinic the way I learn most things now, after the fact and in pieces. And the picture I assembled was uglier than the visit I had sat through myself. Dr. Frost told me later, when all of this had become a matter for courtrooms, that he had come back into her office after my evaluation with his concerned family face on, and asked her how the tests had gone, and that when she told him my mind was sharper than most men half my age, the warmth had drained out of him like water out of a hull. He had pressed her. Surely there was some decline. Surely a man living alone, all those stairs, all that isolation. And when she told him plainly that she would not sign fraudulent paperwork, he had stood in her parking lot afterward with his phone against his ear, pacing, his free hand cutting the air, arguing with someone I could not yet name. One door had closed on him. He was already looking for the next. He found it that same evening, and he did not even have to open it himself. He sent my daughter. Maggie came up the lane at 6:30 in the evening, unannounced, her headlights swinging across the front windows. I watched her park and sit a moment before she got out, both hands on the wheel, her head bowed, and I told myself it was only the long drive. She came to the door with a paper sack in her arms and a smile that did not reach the rest of her face. "Dad," she said, "you look so tired lately. Are you sleeping all right out here? I brought you some chamomile. It always helped me, back when I was teaching and the worry would not let me go." "That is thoughtful, sweetheart," I said, and I stepped back to let her in. and the word sweetheart went through me like a splinter. Because I meant it, even then. That was the cruelty of the whole business. I never once stopped meaning it. She moved into my kitchen the way she had moved through it her whole life, knowing where the mugs lived without looking, filling the kettle, laying out 2 tea bags side by side. I stood in the doorway with my hands in my pockets, and I watched her. And I want you to understand that I was not yet suspicious of the tea. A man can read Liars across a table for 40 years and still not be ready to read his own child pouring him a cup. The mind protects what it cannot bear to know. Then she reached into the pocket of her coat. It was a small thing, quick and almost graceful. The kind of motion you would miss entirely if you were not a man who had spent his life trained to notice exactly the motions people hope you will miss. A little vial, glass or plastic, I could not tell. A tap of white powder into the nearer of the 2 mugs. Not the sugar bowl, which sat right there on the counter in plain view. Something from her pocket, tapped in low, while her eyes flicked once toward the doorway to be sure the old man was not watching. I was watching. I have always been watching. That is the whole of what I am. The cold came down over me again. The deep cold. But I did not let it reach my face. There are moments in a man's life that ask everything of him, and most of them are loud, and a few of them are silent. And this was one of the silent ones. I leaned in the doorway, and I asked her about her students, and I listened to her tell me about a boy in her class who could not sit still, and I watched my daughter carry me a cup of tea she had put something into, and set it down in front of me with both hands, gentle as a blessing. "This will help you sleep," she said. "You need your rest." Dad. We sat at the table. She talked, and I let her. And I lifted the mug to my lips and let the steam touch my face and did not drink. When she looked away, I turned the mug and pretended. It is an old trick, one I learned in a different life, in rooms where a man did well not to drink what he was handed. She did not notice, or perhaps she did not let herself notice, the way I had not let myself notice the vial until my eyes forced it on me. We are all of us, I think, experts at not seeing the things that would require us to act. She stayed until the mug should have been empty, and then she hugged me at the door, and she held on a long time, longer than our hugs had been in years, and I felt her shoulders shake once, the smallest tremor, before she pulled away and went out into the dark. I have asked myself 1,000 times since whether that tremor was guilt or grief, or whether she was simply counting in her head, waiting to see the medicine take hold, doing what she had been told to do and praying it would work fast so she could leave. When her taillights had gone down the lane and the gravel had settled, I carried both mugs to the sink, and I poured mine slowly down the drain, and I watched the pale tea swirl away, and something in me went down the drain with it. Then I did not weep, though I had earned the right. I went down to the cellar workshop where I keep the field kit from my consulting years, the one I never expected to open again, and I took out a clean swab and a reagent vial, and I carried the empty mug down with me. And I went to work, because a man can grieve later. A man can grieve for the rest of his life if he needs to. But the evidence will not wait. And the truth does not care how much it costs the one who finds it. What that swab would tell me, I already knew in my bones. But knowing a thing in your bones and proving it in glass are 2 different countries. And I had learned long ago which one a courtroom lives in. The reagent turned the color I knew it would turn. I sat on the cellar stool under the bare bulb and watched the swab go from white to a pale, dirty blue. And I read the little chart against the vial the way I had read 1,000 charts in my life. And it told me what my bones had already told me upstairs. A benzodiazepine, a sleeping agent, mild, the kind a person takes for anxious nights. Not enough to harm a man, just enough to slow him, to fog him, to make him forget a word, lose a thread, stand confused at the top of his own stairs, just enough to build, cup by cup, the very decline that Dr. Frost had refused to certify with her pen. They could not buy the diagnosis, so they had decided to manufacture the disease. I want to tell you that I felt rage, because rage would be clean and a listening man could forgive it. But what I felt, sitting on that stool with the evidence going blue in my hand, was a grief so heavy it had weight, settling into my chest the way water settles into a flooding compartment, slow and total and cold. There is a particular wound that only a child can give a parent, and it does not bleed. It freezes. I had felt it on the camera feed. I felt it again now, deeper, because a flashlight in the fog is a betrayal of loyalty. But a cup of tea is a betrayal of love, and the second is the one that does not heal. I logged it. Date, time, substance, the color the reagent turned. I wrote it in the steady hand that still would not shake, and then I made the coldest decision of my life, and I wrote that down too, so that I could not later pretend I had not chosen it. From this night forward, I would drink the tea, or seem to. I would let them believe the fog was rolling in. I would become, for as long as it took, the failing old man they needed me to be. And every cup they poured would go down the drain and into this book, until the record was so complete that no story could bend around it. Then I climbed, past the kitchen, past the front room, up the iron spiral, 91 steps, all the way to the lamp room at the top of the light. Because a thing Maggie had said without meaning to say it had lodged in me. She had moved through my kitchen knowing where everything lived, and 3 nights before, on the camera feed, Damien's eyes had climbed these stairs and lingered. They had been searching the whole house, by daylight and by dark, and there was one thing in this house that no thief had any reason to know about, and one place I had not checked since the night this began. The strong box sits in the corner of the lamp room, under the old brass housing where the great lens used to turn. I keep it locked. I keep the key on a cord around my neck, where it has hung for 4 years. I knelt and opened it, and the envelope was there. Cora's hand across the front, my name in her looping script. But it was not lying where I had left it. I am a man who notices the angle of things. I had set it square against the left wall of the box, and it sat now turned, perhaps 3 degrees, perhaps less. The way a thing sits when a careful hand has lifted it, examined it, and tried to set it back exactly, tried, and failed. The way Damien had failed at the boathouse drawers. He had found it. He had held my dead wife's letter in his hands and put it back. And he did not know what it was. Because if he had known what it was, he would not have set it down again. I broke the seal with hands that, for once, were not entirely steady. My love. It began. If you are reading this and Damien is still in our lives, then you are in danger. And I am sorry, because it means I was right, and I did not want to be. I sat down on the cold floor of the lamp room and read the rest in the gray light coming through the storm glass. Cora wrote about small things, the way she always reasoned, from the small, true things outward, the way Damien asked about our finances and called it caring, the way his eyes went to the deed map on my study wall instead of to the photographs beside it. A night she had caught him photographing my papers during a family dinner, and the smooth explanation that had come too quickly. "I know you, Silas," she wrote. "You will want to give him a chance to explain. You believe people can be reconstructed the way you reconstruct a wreck, that if you find the true sequence, you can set it right. But some men are only pretending to be salvageable while they count what you are worth." The letter was dated 8 months before she died. 8 months. She had been carrying this while I drove her to the treatments, while I sat reading to her in those hard chairs and believed I was the one holding her up. I went to see Dolores. She wrote near the end, "You thought I was at the harbor lawyer's lunch. I lied. Forgive me. If I had told you what I was building, you would have argued for more time, more chances, more rope. So I built it where your mercy could not reach it. Trust Dolores. Trust the light. I have left the rest where only you will think to look. Trust the light." I read those 3 words 3 times, sitting on the floor beneath the dark lens, and I did not yet understand them. But I felt the shape of something vast moving under the surface, the way you feel a great fish pass beneath a small boat. Whatever my wife had built in the months she was dying, it was not a letter, and it was not advice. It was a structure. And structures, in Cora's hands, had always been the kind of thing that outlived the people who tried to break them. Tomorrow I would drive to Portland, to the office where my dying wife had gone alone with a folder under her arm, and I would learn at last what she had been building while I thought she was only resting. Dolores Quint's office sat on the top floor of an old brick building on Commercial Street in Portland, with tall windows that looked down on the working harbor, the fishing boats and the ferry and the gulls wheeling over all of it. Rain came against the glass in long gray sheets the morning I drove down. Dolores sat across her wide desk from me in a charcoal suit, and she did not ask why I had finally come. She had been waiting 4 years for me to walk through that door, and now that I had, she simply folded her hands and let me see that she knew. Cora came to me on a Tuesday in March. She said, 4 years ago, the spring before she passed. She told you she was at the harbor lawyer's lunch. She came here instead, with a folder under her arm and a list, in her own hand, of 17 ways a person might try to take everything from you after she was gone. 17. Silas. She had numbered them. I said nothing. Outside, a ferry sounded its horn, low and long, the way the foghorn sounds out on my point. And I thought of my wife sitting in this chair while I drove home believing she was resting. She said to me, "Dolores, I am dying, and I need to build something that still works after I am in the ground. My son-in-law is going to come for my husband, and Silas will not see it coming, because Silas believes every wreck can be salvaged if you only find the true sequence. He will give that man chance after chance. So I need you to build the one thing my husband's mercy cannot undo." Dolores reached into a drawer and laid a leather-bound document on the desk between us, thick as a hymnal, and turned it so I could read the cover. The Cora Hartwell Family Trust. I knew we were comfortable. I told her. The pension, the patents from the systems work, the property. But the figure she named when she opened to the schedule of assets was larger than any number I had ever attached to my own life. Because Cora had spent the last 8 healthy months of her life consolidating all of it. The land and the light and the patents and her own grandmother's things into a single legal vessel built to take heavy weather. She read estate law textbooks in the chemotherapy chair, Dolores said. While you were parking the car, while you were fetching her ginger ale. She would not let me say it out loud in front of you because she knew it would break your heart that she was using her good hours for paperwork instead of for you. But she said, Silas will have years of grief and only months of me. Let me spend the months making the years safe. Then Dolores turned to a page she had marked with a tab, and she put her finger on a clause, and her voice changed. This is the part that matters now, she said. Cora called it the breakwater, the moment anyone, family or not, attempts to defraud the trust, to seize its assets through a false claim of incompetency, or to abuse the grantor or the protected person. That person is automatically and permanently disinherited. Not litigated, not argued. Automatic. The instant they reach for it, their hand passes through it, and everything they would have received transfers to a charity for the protection of the elderly. Every forged paper, every drugged cup, every lie sworn before a notary. He is not building a case to control your money, Silas. He is building the documentation that proves he must never touch a cent of it. I sat a long while with that. The rain ran down the tall windows, and then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest like a stone since the lamp room. And Maggie, I said, if she is part of it, does the breakwater take her too? Dolores did not answer right away. She drew a single sheet from a separate folder, a photocopy, and she did not hand it to me. She let me see only that it existed, that it was in Cora's hand, and that it began with the words, when Margaret makes her mistake. And I want you to understand that she will make it. When, Dolores said quietly. Not if. Cora wrote that line 4 years before any of this happened. She believed her daughter would be drawn into something, pressured into it, and that there would come a night when Maggie would do a wrong thing for what she would tell herself was a right reason. And Cora built the trust so that there was a door left open for her, a way back. If she ever chose to take it, she forgave her. Silas. She forgave her in advance, before the crime was ever committed. She said a mother does not get to choose when her child needs grace. She only gets to decide, ahead of time, that the grace will be there waiting. I had to look out the window then, at the gray harbor, because a man my age does not weep in a lawyer's office if he can help it. And I could only just help it. My wife, dying, had seen further down the channel than I could see while alive and whole. She had armored me, and in the same breath, she had left a light burning for the very person who would help wound me, because she understood something about love that I was only now, at 71, beginning to learn, that justice and mercy are not enemies, that you can build the breakwater and still leave the harbor light on. I gathered myself. I told Dolores I needed everything copied, secured, ready. She told me it already was. Cora had seen to that as well. And as I stood to leave, Dolores said one more thing, and it turned the cold in me a different direction entirely. Silas, there is something you should know that even Cora could not have foreseen. I have had an investigator looking quietly into your son-in-law's affairs since you called me at 7 in the morning. The debts are worse than gambling. There are other people involved, dangerous people, and one of them has begun making arrangements that touch on your granddaughter, on Lily. The rain came against the glass, and I understood that the case had just grown a second floor, and that there was a 7-year-old child somewhere under it. The investigator Dolores had hired was a man named Marcus Webb, 47, lean and tired-eyed, and he worked out of a second-floor office in Bangor that smelled of old coffee and older paper. He had spent 22 years following money, and when I sat down across his desk, he slid a folder toward me the way a doctor slides over a scan he does not want to discuss in the hallway. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, "in 22 years I have seen a great many men in a great deal of trouble. Gambling, embezzlement. The other woman. Usually it is one of those things. Occasionally two. Your son-in-law is running all three at once, and the people he owes are not the kind who send a polite letter when you are late." I opened the folder. Bank statements. Screenshots from offshore betting sites. The numbers climbed off the page and would not stop. $340,000 in gambling debt, Webb said, spread across underground card games down in Portland, and 2 arrangements I would call loan sharking if I were speaking plainly, which I am. He has been bleeding money for 3 years, and there is more. He laid down a second sheet. His employer, an investment firm in Boston, has opened an internal inquiry. $87,000 in client funds that cannot be accounted for. They have not gone to the district attorney yet because they are still tracing where it went. But they will. My rate is that he has 6 weeks, perhaps less, before that becomes a criminal matter. That, Mr. Hartwell, is his clock. That is how long he has to get his hands on something large before his whole world comes down. I sat with the cold settling in me, and I understood the shape of it now. The hurry, the drugged tea, the forged history Dr. Frost would not sign. A drowning man does not plan carefully. He grabs whatever floats. And Damien had looked across the water and seen my lighthouse floating there, and decided it would hold his weight. "There is one more account," Webb said, and he slid over a 3rd page. "A bank account, registered to a woman who is not your daughter. $23,000 in it. The deposits are small and regular. 200 here, 300 there. Moved out of the joint account he shares with Maggie in amounts small enough that a busy school teacher would never notice. 18 months of it. She thinks they are barely making the mortgage. He is stocking a lifeboat, and there is only 1 seat in it, and it is not hers, and it is not the child's." I looked at that page a long time. Maggie was teaching 7-year-olds their times tables, coming home to brew poisoned tea for her father because somewhere a man had convinced her it was the only way to keep her family afloat. And the whole while that same man was siphoning the household down to nothing to fund another woman and a one-way ticket out. My daughter was not only a conspirator, she was a mark. He had married her the way he married everything, for what he could strip out of it before he abandoned the hull. That thought was bad enough. The next page was worse. Webb watched my face as he laid it down. "This is the part that stopped me," he said. "I did not go looking for it. It surfaced on its own when I ran his history. 6 years ago, before Maggie, your son-in-law was married to a woman in Sarasota, Florida. Her name was Eleanor Pace, a widow, 68 years old when they met. Comfortable, no close family. I did not say anything. I have learned that the worst news arrives best in silence. Within 2 years of the wedding, Webb went on. Her accounts were drained. Her house was sold, and she was placed in a low-cost care facility on the strength of a competency finding signed by a physician who lost his license the following year for exactly that kind of work. Damian Vance was named her guardian. He controlled everything. She died 11 months later in that facility, alone. The death was natural, as far as anyone looked, and no one looked very hard, because there was no one left to look. He inherited what was still standing, and he moved on. He changed states. He changed names slightly, dropped a middle initial, and then he met your daughter. I sat in that tired little office with the rain that had followed me up from Portland, still ticking against the window. And I felt the last warm thing in me go out like a snuffed wick. This was not a desperate man making a single terrible choice. This was a pattern. This was a man who hunted, and the prey he hunted was exactly the prey I was. An aging person with assets and few defenders, and a heart that wanted to believe the best. Eleanor Pace had been the rehearsal. Maggie and I were the performance. And somewhere down the line, after he had stripped us and moved on, there would have been another widow, another lighthouse, another lonely old fool with a kind face and a full bank account. World without end. I am going to tell you something I am not proud of, said the quiet voice inside me that I have learned to trust above all the others. Up to that afternoon, some buried part of me had still been negotiating, still hoping that when the trap closed, I might find some way to spare him the full weight of it. For Maggie's sake, for the child's. That part of me died in Marcus Webb's office, because I understood that if I did not stop this man completely, all the way to the bottom, there would be an Eleanor Pace who never got justice and a stranger somewhere down the coast being measured for the same fate. My fight was no longer only about my land or my pride, or even my daughter. It was about every person this man would otherwise go on to drown. I thanked Webb and asked him to keep watching. And as I stood to go, he said the last thing, the thing that set the clock ticking in earnest. He is not waiting on a legitimate doctor anymore. Mr. Hartwell, my surveillance has him meeting a man named Gerald Patin, disbarred accountant, lost his license for medical document fraud, cash only. Your son-in-law has stopped looking for a doctor who will say yes. He has hired a man to forge the one who said no. I did not go straight home from Bangor. I drove the long way, down the coast road with the gray water on my right hand the whole way, because a man needs room to think when the thing he is thinking will not fit inside a house. And the thing that would not fit was this. If Damian Vance was a predator who married for plunder, then why had my daughter helped him? Maggie was not greedy. I had raised her on a keeper's salary in a drafty tower, and she had never once asked for more than we had. She cried at the end of sad films. She carried spiders outside in a cup rather than crush them. The woman on my camera feed, keeping cold watch in the fog, did not match the daughter I knew. And a mismatch like that is exactly the kind of thing my whole life had trained me to refuse to ignore. The answer came 2 days later, and it came in an envelope, though not one of mine. Marcus Webb called first to prepare me. Maggie had received a piece of mail at her house in the late afternoon, he said. Plain, unmarked, no return address. She had opened it on her front step and then gone inside and not come out. And an hour later, Damian had arrived home and the lights had stayed on late and the two of them had been, in Webb's careful word, arguing. He did not know what was in the envelope, but he had photographed Maggie carrying the same kind of envelope, a few days before, into a storage unit she rented under a name that was not her married name and paid for in cash. It took me the better part of a week, and a quiet conversation with an old friend at the county clerk's office, to reconstruct the rest. And when I had it, I understood at last the true shape of my daughter's cage. Lily was not Damien's child. She was Maggie's, from before. From a brief and difficult time my daughter had gone through in a city far from here. A time she had come home from quiet and changed and pregnant. And Cora and I had asked no questions because she had asked us to ask none. And we had loved the baby and let the rest lie buried. Damien had married Maggie when Lily was barely walking. He had given the child his name on paper, and somewhere in the years since, he had gone digging the way men like him always dig, and he had found what Maggie had buried, the true father, the old court filing, the thing that could be used, and he used it. That was the cage. That was the thing the camera could never show me. Every time my daughter wavered, every time her conscience rose up against what he was making her do, he reminded her that he held Lily's paternity in his hand like a lit match over dry grass. Help me, or I will burn it all down. I will tell the courts. I will tell the child. I will fight you for custody, and I will win. Because I am her legal father, and you are a woman who lied on a birth certificate. And when I am done, you will not see her at all. He had not bought my daughter. He had taken her child hostage and made her carry the ransom note herself. I had to pull the truck over on the shoulder above Frenchman Bay and sit with my hands on the wheel until my chest loosened enough to drive. Because the cold I had carried since the first night, the cold I had aimed so steadily at the both of them, broke apart in me, and underneath it was the oldest thing a father owns. Not anger. Sorrow. My Maggie had not chosen money over me. She had been forced to choose between her father and her daughter, the two halves of her own heart, by a man who enjoyed making her choose. She had kept watch in the fog with tears she would not let him see, and she had brewed that tea with hands that shook, and the long hug at my door, the small tremor in her shoulders, had not been guilt at all. It had been a goodbye she could not say out loud. It had been a daughter holding her father one last time before she did the thing that was tearing her in two. Cora had known. When Margaret makes her mistake, my wife had not believed our daughter was wicked. She had believed she was breakable, the way the truly loving are breakable, through the people they cannot bear to lose. And she had left a door open for her, 4 years ahead of time, because she understood her child better than I, the great reader of evidence, had ever bothered to. I drove home in the dusk with the lighthouse coming up dark against the last of the light. And by the time I reached my own lane, I had stopped grieving and started thinking. Because grief is a tide, and thinking is a chart. And a man can only steer by one of them. I could not simply expose Damien. If I brought the law down on him crudely, he would carry out his threat on the way down, out of spite, and the courts would tangle Lily up in it for years. No. I had to take him in a single motion, completely, with the evidence so total and the trap so closed that he would have no time and no leverage to strike at the child on his way to the bottom. I had to give him exactly what he wanted, and let him commit to taking it so fully, in front of so many witnesses, that the breakwater clause would close over him like deep water, and there would be nothing left of his threats but a man in handcuffs, wondering how the old fossil had done it. He wanted a safe full of money. He had told Dr. Frost I hoarded cash, told the betting men, told himself. Very well. I would build him a safe. I would make it so tempting, so perfectly baited, that he would walk into my workshop in the dead of night and reach for it with both hands. And the moment his hands closed on it, they would close on nothing at all. To bait a hook, you must first know what the fish believes about the water. And so for the next several days, I let Damien believe the water was exactly as he hoped. I made my movements small and forgetful in front of him when he came by, which he now did every other day under one pretext or another. The furnace, the gutters, a leak that did not exist. I let him watch me misplace my reading glasses. I let him find me staring out at the bay with a vague look that cost me a great deal to manufacture, because there is nothing harder for a proud man than to perform his own decay. But Cora had taught me, long ago, that pride is a luxury and survival is a discipline. And I had buried enough good men at sea to know which one keeps you afloat. While I performed, Marcus Webb watched, and one cold evening his call came that turned the whole case on its hinge. "Your son-in-law is recruiting," Webb said. "He was at a tavern out on the county road tonight, the Rosewood, meeting a man. I have audio. The man is a locksmith. Damien needs someone to open a safe, an old combination model, and the locksmith said no. Said he runs a legitimate shop now, licensed and bonded, no questions, no cash jobs." So Damien stopped asking nicely. He pulled out his phone and played the man a recording, something the locksmith had said months ago to a stranger he thought was a client, admitting to off-book jobs he had done since his release. Blackmail. "Mr. Hartwell. Plain as day. Help me open the safe, or this recording goes to your parole officer and you go back inside." The locksmith took the job. His name is Eli Brandt. I wrote the name in the ledger out of pure habit, the way I had written every name. And then I sat looking at it, and something old and cold turned over in the bottom of my memory, the way a thing long sunk will sometimes shift on the seabed and send a single bubble up to break the surface. Eli Brandt. I knew that name. I had carried that name for 25 years. I climbed to the lamp room, and I opened the old case files I keep there. The ones from my consulting years and before. The ones I had told myself I kept only for the pension paperwork. I found him near the bottom. A photograph of a much younger man, gaunt and frightened, taken the year I had testified at his sentencing. But the photograph was not the first time I had seen Eli Brandt's face. The first time was on the water, 25 years ago, off Mount Desert Rock in a November gale. A small boat went down that should never have been out in such weather, and I was aboard the cutter that answered the call. We pulled 3 men from that water. 2 of them lived. The third I went into the sea after myself, because he had gone under and the others had given him up, and I will not pretend it was courage so much as stubbornness, the refusal to let the ocean keep one more than it had already earned. I got a hand into his collar, and we came up together into the spray, and the face that gasped against mine, gray and half-drowned, belonged to a young man named Eli Brandt. He lived, and 3 years later his name crossed my desk again, because the young man I had pulled from the sea had fallen on hard times and turned his hands, which were clever hands, to opening other people's safes, and one of those safes had been protected by a system I myself had designed. My vibration sensors had caught him. The irony was not lost on me even then. I had saved his life, and then my work had ended his freedom. The prosecutor wanted 8 years, and I had done a thing I have done only a handful of times in a long career. A thing Cora and I argued about that very night at this kitchen table. I wrote a letter to the judge. I wrote that Eli Brandt was a skilled man who had made a poor choice under real pressure. That I had seen the will to live in him with my own eyes when I held his collar above the waves, and that 8 years would harden him into a career criminal while 3 might give him a road back. I asked for mercy. Not because his crime was small, but because I believed he could be reconstructed. The way I believed everything could be reconstructed if you found the true sequence and gave it room. The judge gave him 3. He served them. He came out, and he built a clean life, year by patient year. And I had not thought of him again from that day to this. I sat in the lamp room with his frightened young face in one hand and the ledger in the other. And I understood the cruel and perfect symmetry of what was unfolding. The man my son-in-law had blackmailed into opening my safe was the same man I had pulled from the November sea and then argued out of a prison cell. The mercy I had shown a quarter century ago was about to walk up my own lane in the dark and try to crack the bait I had built. I want to tell you that I felt betrayed by that, but I did not. What I felt was something stranger and quieter, a sense that the long account of a man's life was coming due all at once, every kindness and every hard choice arriving together on the same dark night to be weighed. I had given Eli Brandt his life and his liberty, and now he was being driven by another man's blackmail and his own old fear to come and take from me. But here's the thing about a man you once pulled from the sea. He remembers the hand that found his collar. He remembers it in his sleep. And I began to wonder, sitting up there with the lens dark above me and the foghorn starting out on the point, whether the mercy I had spent 25 years ago was not gone at all, whether it had only been out at sea this whole time, and was finally, on the worst night of my life, coming home. We built the trap on a cold Wednesday morning, while the bay lay flat and pewter under a sky that could not decide on rain. Dolores drove up from Portland with the paperwork, and by 7 o'clock, the county recorder had logged my empty workshop as a protected facility held in the name of the Cora Hartwell Family Trust. It was no longer simply a storage building behind an old man's house. Anyone who broke into it now was not committing a neighborly trespass that a smooth tongue could explain away. He was breaking and entering a posted property held in legal trust, and the cameras already mounted in the eaves were, as of that morning, the lawful and documented security system of that property. Every frame admissible. Then we set the bait. 2 of Sheriff Bingham's men carried in the safe. I had found it through a dealer down in Rockland, an authentic 1940s combination model. A Chubb manganese box, heavy as a cannon and just the kind of antique a clever locksmith would recognize at a glance as worth the risk. They bolted it to the floor on industrial anchors that would take power tools to free, and inside it I placed exactly nothing of value. Copies of expired patents, a stack of bond certificates long since redeemed, impressive at a distance, worthless in the hand. And on top of all of it, propped where a flashlight beam would find it first, a small framed photograph of Cora from the day we were married. 45 years ago this coming spring, her laughing into the wind with the whole of her life still ahead of her. "It looks real enough to be worth dying for," said the younger deputy, admiring it. "That is the idea," I told him, but it was not entirely the idea. The truth was that I wanted Cora in that box. I wanted her face to be the thing that man saw at the moment he believed he had won, because I had begun to understand that everything closing around Damien Vance had been built by her hand. And it was right that she should be there at the end of it. Underneath the photograph, beneath the worthless papers, I set one thing of real value: a voice recorder, fresh batteries, set to wake at the first sound and run silent. And against the inside of the door, I propped a small hand-lettered card, face out, so that it would be the very first thing the beam fell on when the door swung wide. I will tell you what it said when the time comes for him to read it. That left the signal. The lamp at the top of my tower had been dark for years, automated and then shuttered when the Coast Guard moved the navigation light out to a buoy. But the old lens still stood, and the work still turned if a man knew where to feed them power. And I knew, because I had kept her in trim for 4 years, the way a widower keeps his wife's garden. We rigged a switch I could throw from the cabin 20 miles north, where I would be establishing my alibi, a line through the cellular relay, so that when the moment came, I could send the great light blazing out over the bay from miles away. When it came on, Sheriff Bingham's people would move. Trust the light, Cora had written. I was finally beginning to obey her, and then, on the second evening of our preparations, with the trap nearly set, I received a telephone call from a number I did not know, and a low, careful voice on the other end said, "Is this the man they used to call the Keeper? The man who pulled a fellow out of the water off Mount Desert Rock? A long time ago." I said that it was. There was a silence, and in it I could hear a man gathering the hardest kind of courage. The kind it takes to do a decent thing when a dozen easier and dirtier roads lie open. "My name is Eli Brandt," he said. "You will not remember me, but I have remembered you every day of my life. A man has been making me do something. He has a recording, and he has me cornered. And I am supposed to come open a safe for him in a few nights' time. He told me whose place it was, and when he said the name, I knew it was yours. He thinks I am his man. He does not know you are the reason I am not still rotting in a cell. So I am calling to tell you, I will be there. But I will be your man, not his. Tell me what you need me to do." I closed my eyes in the lamp room with the receiver against my ear, and I thought of a gray, drowning face coming up against mine in the spray 25 years gone. And I understood that the mercy I had cast upon the water all that time ago had not sunk after all. It had drifted out and circled and was coming back to me now on the worst tide of my life, exactly when I needed it. I told Eli Brandt to do nothing different, to take the job, to play it straight, to bring his tools and open the box when the night came. The rest, I told him, would take care of itself, and the only thing he need do for me was take his time about the lock, and not be alarmed when the great light came on overhead. I hung up, and for the first time since the first night, I was not entirely alone in the dark. 2 days later, the last gear dropped into place, and it dropped hard. An email arrived from the Hancock County Court, and the subject line read, "Emergency motion granted, hearing rescheduled." I opened it with a steady hand. Damien's lawyers had filed an emergency motion to accelerate my competency hearing, and a judge had granted it. The hearing that had stood weeks away now stood 3 days off, on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and I knew, the way you know a squall is coming by the color of the water, that Damien Vance was not going to wait for any courtroom. A desperate man does not file an emergency motion and then go home to sleep. He files it to box me in, and then he moves before the box can close. He was not coming Monday. He was coming now. He was coming tonight. I drove the 20 miles north to Tobin Ashford's fishing camp at 8 o'clock that evening, with an overnight bag on the seat beside me and a tablet that would let me watch my own home from a distance. Tobin was 73, a retired lobsterman and my fishing companion of 15 years, and he owned a camp with a security camera over the door that stamped the time on every frame, and the kind of friendship that asks no questions when a man says he needs to be seen somewhere all night. He met me with 2 beers and a cribbage board, and never once asked why. Sheriff Bingham came by at 10 o'clock as we had arranged, stood in the doorway long enough for Tobin's camera to timestamp him, talking to a living, breathing, lucid old man 20 miles from the scene, and then he went back to take his place among the rocks. By midnight, his deputies were in position in the dark of my workshop. 4 inside, 2 out. No light. No sound. I told Tobin I was turning in. I went to the small guest room, and I sat on the edge of the bed with the tablet on my knees and the live feed already running, and I did not lie down. Because a man does not lie down for a thing like this. I put on my good vest and my tie in that little room, the closest thing to ceremony I could manage from 20 miles away. Because whatever else this night was, it was the closing of an account my wife had opened on her deathbed, and I would not meet it in my shirt sleeves. They came at 13 minutes past 2 in the morning. It did not escape me, even then, that it was the very hour I had first woken to the sight of my daughter standing watch in the fog. The same 13 minutes past 2, as though the night itself kept a ledger and had circled back to the page where all of this began. 3 figures, headlights killed at the foot of the lane, moving up through the fog with flashlights hooded low. Damien in the lead, walking with that loose confidence that had never once been earned. Maggie 2 steps behind, her shoulders drawn in, and even on a small screen in the dark, I could read the misery in the line of her body. A woman being marched toward something by a hand at her back that no camera could see. And third, carrying a leather case, moving slow and heavy, came the man I had pulled from the sea. At the workshop door, Eli Brandt knelt to the lock, and then he did the first of the things he had promised me without my asking. He stopped. He held his flashlight on the mechanism, and I heard his voice come thin through the microphone. "This is no ordinary padlock," he said. "This is bank-grade hardware. Why does a falling-down workshop have a lock like a vault? The old fool bought expensive and forgot he had it." Damien snapped. "Just open it." Eli took his time. He had told me he would, and he did. He worked that lock with the slowness of a man savoring a last cigarette, and every minute he stole was a minute more for the recorder and the cameras. A minute deeper that Damien committed himself. A minute closer to the moment the breakwater would close. I watched Damien begin to pace, his hooded beam jerking across the walls, his patience fraying into something uglier. And I watched Maggie drift toward the open doorway and stop there, half in and half out. The way a person stands at the rail of a boat she is thinking of leaving. Then Eli's flashlight, sweeping the workshop interior as if searching for purchase on the lock, came to rest for one held second on the eave above the door, where a small red point blinked once every 8 seconds, and I saw his shoulders change. He had found the camera. He had been looking for it. Because I had told him, in our one brief conversation, exactly where to look. And now he did the second thing. The thing that turned the night. "Cameras," he said. Loud enough to carry. Loud enough for the recorder. Loud enough to put it on the permanent account. His beam moved to the next corner and the next, finding the lens in each, then dropped to the floor where the thin lines of the motion sensors ran along the baseboards. Motion sensors along the floor. He turned slowly toward Damien, and his voice was flat and certain. This is not an old man's storeroom. This whole building is wired like a federal vault. Do you know who designed systems like this? Do you have the first idea whose house you brought me to? Some old fossil named Hartwell, Damien said. But the confidence had cracked now, a hairline running through it. So what? He is senile. The doctor, there is no doctor. Eli said. There is no senile old man. I have spent 3 years of my life inside a cell because of a security system exactly like this one. And the man who built that system is the same man who wrote the letter that took 5 years off my sentence. Silas Hartwell. You did not bring me here to rob a confused old keeper. You brought me to the one man in this state who has been 3 moves ahead of you since the night you first scratched his lock. In the guest room 20 miles north, I sat very still with the tablet glowing in my hands, and I watched a quarter-century-old kindness pay itself back in full. Damien stood frozen in the beam of his own flashlight, the pry bar useless in his grip, his whole scheme suddenly visible to him in the cold light of another man's words. And Maggie, in the doorway, had turned to look at her husband with an expression I could not read on so small a screen, but would understand all too well before the hour was out. You are lying, Damien said, but his voice had gone high and thin. Open the safe. Open it now. We are too far in to stop. And here is the thing about a desperate man. Even staring at the proof of his own ruin, he cannot let go of the prize, because the prize is the only thing standing between him and the bottom. So Eli Brandt, after one long look at the man who had blackmailed him, knelt back down to the safe. Not because Damien commanded it, because the two of us had agreed, on the telephone, that the trap only closed if the box came open and the man reached inside. I rested my thumb on the switch that would send the great light blazing out over the bay, and I waited for the safe to open. A safe from the 1940s does not surrender quickly, even to a man with Eli Brandt's hands. And so for 11 long minutes I sat in that small room 20 miles away and listened to the slow scrape and click of a craftsman at his work, while Damien paced and Maggie stood in the doorway like a woman waiting for a verdict. And then, with the patience worn out of him entirely, Damien did the thing that damned him beyond any saving. He began, in the dark, to build his alibi out loud. He moved close to Eli, close to the microphone he did not know was there, and he dropped his voice the way men do when they believe a low voice is a private one. If anything goes wrong here, he said, you remember this. This was all her idea. Maggie. She is the one who knew about the old man's money, the trust, all of it. She brought me into it. I am just a husband helping his wife with her own family. You heard nothing else from me. It was her. 11 words into that speech. I saw Maggie's body change in the doorway. She had heard him. Every word. The microphone caught the small sound she made. Not a cry, not a gasp. Just a single sharp intake of breath. The sound a person makes when something they have been leaning their whole weight against suddenly gives way beneath them. She had betrayed her own father to protect her child from this man, had carried his ransom and brewed his poison and kept his watch in the fog, had torn herself in half at his command. And the instant the floor tilted under him, he had reached out without a flicker of hesitation and tried to push her into the dark to save himself. There are betrayals built over years with elaborate machinery. And there are betrayals a coward simply speaks aloud the moment he is frightened. And the second kind cuts deeper, because there is no plan behind it, no necessity, only the bare and instant truth of how little you were ever worth to him. I watched my daughter learn, in one held breath, exactly what she had thrown her family away for. And I will tell you that whatever cold thing I had carried toward her since the first night went out of me entirely in that moment. And what was left was only a father watching his child take a mortal wound, 20 miles away, with his hand on a switch. Then the safe opened. Eli swung the heavy door wide, and 3 flashlight beams converged on the inside of it, and Damien lunged forward with both hands, the way I had known a drowning man would lunge for the only thing afloat. And what his beam found first, propped against the inside of the door exactly as I had set it, was a small white card in my own hand. He read it aloud without meaning to, the way you read a thing before you can stop yourself. Smile. You are being recorded. Signed. The old fossil. I threw the switch, 20 miles away, at the top of my tower. The great lens woke from 4 years of darkness, and the light came on. It does not come on like a household lamp. It comes on like a sunrise that has been compressed into a single instant. A blaze that swept out over the bay and raked across the workshop windows and turned the fog itself to burning white. And every man in that building flinched from it, because the human animal cannot help but flinch from a great light arriving where it has no business being. And in the half-second, they stood blinded and frozen. Sheriff Bingham's people came up out of the dark. They came from behind the stacked lumber and out of the shadowed corners. 4 of them inside and 2 more through the door. And the workshop that a moment before had held 3 thieves and a baited box was suddenly full of law. I heard Bingham's voice, level and enormous in the small space. County Sheriff's Office. Nobody moves. And I heard the safe, the worthless, beautiful safe, give up its last secret. Because as the recorder in the bottom of it kept turning, it had caught every word. The blackmail and the betrayal and the card read aloud. All of it now sworn and permanent and beyond the reach of any smooth tongue on earth. Damien did not go quietly. They never do. The ones who have never paid. He shouted that this was entrapment, that I had baited him, that the safe was empty and so there was no crime. And I will tell you what I would have told him to his face if I had been there. The thing Dolores told him for me in a courtroom weeks later. A man is not entrapped by being given the chance to refuse. He broke into a posted property held in legal trust in the dead of night with bolt cutters and a hired locksmith, after months of forging documents and drugging an old man and blackmailing the very hands he used. The empty safe did not make him innocent. The empty safe was the whole point. He had not broken into a building full of money. He had broken into a record of his own crimes, assembled patiently by the man he had called as good as dead, and the only thing he had managed to steal was the rest of his own life. But none of that was the thing I was watching. On the small screen, in the white blaze pouring through the windows, I watched my daughter. She had not run. She had not moved at all. When a young deputy reached her, she put her wrists out in front of her without being asked, and she did not look at the deputy, and she did not look at Damien being forced down against the workbench, shouting her name now, calling on her to back his lie. Tell them, Maggie. Tell them it was you. She looked into the camera in the eave. She could not have known for certain I was watching, but she looked anyway, straight up into the small red light. The way you look toward a window where you hope someone you love might be standing. And she held my gaze across 20 miles of fog and 4 years of grief. And she did not say a word. Because some things cannot be said and must only be looked. I had built the perfect trap. I had caught the man who hunted the helpless, caught him completely, with witnesses enough to bury him. And I sat alone in a borrowed room in my good vest and tie and understood that winning and losing had arrived, as they so often do, on the very same tide. The light kept turning long after the handcuffs clicked shut, and I remember thinking that machines are merciful in their way, because they do not stop to grieve. The beam swept the wet rocks, the heaving black water, the 2 patrol cars whose blue and red ran together in the fog like spilled paint. I stood by the open door of the keeper's room with my hand still on the cold iron rail, and I watched my daughter being led down the gravel path. And I understood that there is no version of winning that does not also cost you something you cannot afford. Eli came to me first. He had been outside near the cruisers, talking low to the deputy who had taken his statement, and when he walked up the slope toward me, his limp was worse than usual, the way it always got when the cold settled into the old break in his leg. He stopped an arm's length away and did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "You could have told me about the recorder, about all of it." His voice was not angry. It was something heavier than anger, the sound a man makes when he learns he was trusted only halfway. "I couldn't," I said. "If you had known, they would have read it on your face. You have an honest face. Eli, it's the worst poker face in the county." That made the corner of his mouth move, just barely. He looked out at the water. 25 years ago, you pulled me off the deck of a boat that was already going under," he said. "I never paid that back. I told myself I never could." He turned to face me. "Tonight I sat in a freezing truck for 4 hours, waiting for a light I wasn't sure would ever come on. And when it came on, I called the men with the badges, and I prayed I was doing right by you." He shook his head slowly. "Now we're even, old man. Now we're finally even." I told him we were not even, that a debt of a life is not the kind of arithmetic that ever balances, and that I had not saved him so the ledger would close. I had saved him because a boy was drowning and I had hands. He listened, and then he did something he had never done in 3 decades of friendship. He put his arm around my shoulders, and the 2 of us stood there like that. 2 stubborn old men holding each other up in the wind, while the light went around and around above us. Then I had one more conversation to finish. They had Damien against the side of the second cruiser, and a young officer was reading him his rights from a small laminated card. Damien's expensive coat was soaked through. His hair, which he had always kept so carefully, hung in his eyes. But when he saw me coming, he smiled, and the smile was the worst thing I had seen all night. Because it was the smile of a man who still believed he would talk his way out of the water. "Silas," he said, warm as a salesman, "this is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Whatever you think you heard—" "I didn't hear anything," I said. "A machine did. A little gray machine that doesn't forget and doesn't get scared and doesn't love anybody. It heard you tell my daughter to take the blame. It heard everything." I let that sit. Then I said the name. Eleanor Pace. The smile came off his face the way paint comes off in a storm. For 1/2 of 1 second, I saw the real man underneath, and the real man was afraid. There was a woman in Florida, I said quietly. A widow. She had a house near the water and a savings account, and a heart that wanted to believe in somebody. By the time you were done with her, she had none of those things. I found her. She agreed to talk to a detective. You are not a son-in-law who made one bad mistake. Damien, you are a tide that comes in over and over, and tonight you finally came in too far. He started to say something, and the young officer guided his head down and put him in the back seat, and the door closed. And that was the last private word I ever had with him. The hardest part I left for last, because I am a coward in exactly one direction. Maggie was in the first cruiser. The window was down 2 inches. I crossed to it and crouched so my eyes were level with hers, my knees complaining the whole way down. And for a moment, neither of us could find a single word in the whole English language. She had her mother's eyes. She always had. I had spent the last year so busy building the trap that I had let myself forget that. Daddy, she said, and her voice broke on the second syllable, the way it had when she was 6 and confessing to a broken window. I didn't know how to get out. He had Lily. He had everything. I know, I said, and I did know. By then. Listen to me. This is not the end of your story. Do you hear me? Whatever happens in that courtroom, you are still her mother and you are still my girl. There is a road back. It is long, and it is steep, and I will be standing at the far end of it with the porch light on. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass, and I pressed mine against it from the outside. And for that one breath there was nothing between us but a 1/4 inch of window and 39 years of everything we had not said. Then the engine turned over, and they took her down the hill, and the taillights folded into the fog. And I was alone on the rocks with the turning light and the long, cold business of waiting for the law to decide what mercy and justice would weigh against each other when the sun came up. The courthouse in Bar Harbor was a square brick building that smelled of old radiators and floor wax. And I sat in the 3rd row of the gallery for 11 days while the law did what the rocks could not. I had spent 40 years writing reports that told other men how the sea had killed someone. And I had learned that the truth arrives slowly, in pieces, the way driftwood comes ashore. A trial is no different. You wait. You watch the tide bring it in. The prosecutor was a lean woman named Adair, and she built her case the way a good shipwright lays a keel, one timber at a time. She put the recorder on the stand first, the little machine Damien had left in the empty safe with that card that said "Smile. You are being recorded." Signed. The old fossil. Then she put up the forged trust documents, the ones Gerald Patan had signed in a motel outside Portland for $800, and a promise that turned out to be worth nothing. Patan testified for 2 hours. He would not look at Damien. I did not blame him. But the thing that broke the case open was not the paper. It was Eleanor Pace. She had not lived to testify. And so it was a detective from Florida who carried her into that room, file by file. He told the jury how a widow in her 70s, comfortable and alone in a house near the water in Sarasota, had married a charming younger man 6 years before, and how within 2 years her accounts had been emptied, her house sold, and the woman herself signed away into a low-cost facility on the strength of a competency finding from a physician who lost his license the following year for exactly that kind of work. She died 11 months later, alone, and no one had looked hard, because the man who had married her had seen to it that there was no one left to look. The name on those Florida papers was not quite Damian Vance. He had dropped a middle initial and crossed a state line and gone looking for the next one. Adair laid Eleanor's story beside ours like two photographs of the same wound. The pattern was unmistakable. He found people with assets and few defenders and a heart that wanted to believe. And he pressed until something gave. He was not a swindler who had stumbled into our lives. He was a predator who had hunted us on purpose. The way I had once hunted the cause of a sinking, methodically, without mercy. When Damien took the stand, he was still handsome in that way that had fooled my daughter and would have fooled a jury of fools. But these were not fools. They watched him smile, and they did not smile back. He called me bitter. He called me old. He used that word again, fossil, as though it were a knife he had not yet worn down. And I sat very still and let him do it. Because every time he opened his mouth, he buried himself another foot deep. The jury was out for 6 hours. I went down to the harbor while they deliberated and watched the lobster boats come in. And I thought about Cora, who had been a maritime lawyer for 30 years and who used to say that the law was just mercy with a long memory. I did not know yet whether she was right. They found him guilty on every count: fraud, extortion, forgery of medical and legal documents, the poisoning of a dependent elder, and conspiracy, count after count of it. When the Florida matter was folded in, with a wrongful death still under active investigation down there, and a guardianship built on the same forged kind of paper, the judge handed down a sentence of 32 years, which for a man of 44 was, in every way that mattered, the rest of his life. He did not look at me when they took him out. He looked at Maggie, and Maggie, God help her, looked at the floor. Then came the harder part, the part I had been dreading since the night on the rocks. They tried my daughter, Adair, to her great credit, did not pretend Maggie was innocent. Maggie had signed papers. Maggie had lied to me. But Adair laid out the other truth, too. The one twist of the knife that had held my girl in place. Damien had threatened to take Lily. He held the child's true paternity over her like a lit match, and he had told Maggie in plain words that if she ever went to her father, he would burn it down in open court and fight her for custody until she could not win. A mother under that kind of pressure does things that look like crimes and are really only fear wearing a crime's coat. The judge saw it. The jury saw it. Maggie pleaded to a lesser charge, and the sentence came down suspended. 2 years of probation, 400 hours of service, and counseling. She would not go to prison. She would go home, to whatever home was left, and she would raise her daughter. When it was over, Eli Brandt found me on the courthouse steps. 25 years ago, I had pulled him half drowned out of the water off Mount Desert Rock, and a quarter century later, he had repaid that debt by helping me. And the court had weighed his honest testimony against his lockpicking and let him walk with a fine and a warning. He shook my hand and could not speak, and that was all right. Some debts settle in silence. Dolores Quint was waiting at the bottom of the steps. My wife's old colleague, 64 years old and steady as a piling. She had handled the trust, the estate, all the cold machinery of it. But she did not talk to me about machinery now. She put her hand on my sleeve and she said, Silas, there is something I should have given you a long time ago. Cora left 2 letters. You read the first one years ago. The second one she addressed to Maggie. She told me to hold it until the day it was needed. I think that day has come. I stood on the courthouse steps, with the autumn gone to early winter and the harbor gray behind me, and I understood that the trial had ended one story and that another, older one, written in my dead wife's hand, was only now about to begin. Dolores brought the letter to the lighthouse on a clear December afternoon, and Maggie was there because I had asked her to be. And Lily was there because at 7 years old, she went wherever her mother went, holding the hem of Maggie's coat the way a small boat holds to a mooring. We climbed the 91 steps to the lamp room together, the 3 generations of us, and at the top, where the great lens had stood dark for years, I handed my daughter an envelope written in her mother's hand. Cora had been dead for 4 years. She had written the letter in the last months of her life, in the same season she built the trust, when Maggie was a married woman of 34 and had not yet seen the true face of the man she had wed. And she had given it to Dolores with instructions to hold it until the day it was needed. My wife, the maritime lawyer who said the law was mercy with a long memory, had read that man for what he was while the rest of us were still calling him family. She had foreseen the wreck before it ever struck the rocks. Maggie read it aloud, because she could not read it any other way, her voice breaking on the first line. My darling girl, the letter said, if you are reading this, then something has gone wrong, and you have done something you believe your father cannot forgive. I am writing to tell you that you are already forgiven. Not for what you will do, because I cannot know that. You are forgiven because you are mine, and because love that only holds when you are good is not love at all. It is a contract. I never wanted a contract with you. I wanted a daughter. Trust the light. Maggie, even when you cannot see it, it is turning, and it will find you in the dark. I had spent the better part of a year learning to hate. I had hunted Damien Vance with all the cold patience of 40 years of investigating the drowned, and I had told myself it was justice. But standing in that lamp room, listening to my dead wife forgive our living daughter before the sin was ever committed, I understood the thing I had gotten wrong. Justice without mercy is just revenge with paperwork. Cora had known that. She had built her whole life on it, and she had left the lesson where I would find it only after I had nearly forgotten how to be merciful at all. I thought, God forgive me, that I had come within an inch of teaching myself the very coldness I despised in the man I had caught. Maggie put the letter down, and she looked at me. And I did not say anything wise, because there was nothing wise to say. I just opened my arms, an old man's arms, and my daughter came into them the way she had when she was small, and Lily, not understanding any of it and understanding all of it, wrapped herself around both our legs. We stood like that a long while, and the cold light came in through the glass. There was repair work to do, and not only on the lighthouse. The trust Cora had built was made whole again once the forgeries were thrown out, and what Damien had tried to steal went where she had always meant it to go, into a fund for Lily and into the keeping of the light itself. I had Eli come up that spring to help me with the lamp. 25 years after I pulled him out of the water, the 2 of us spent a week on our backs in the lamp room with our hands full of brass and glass, and when we were done, on a Friday evening in April, I threw the switch. The light turned, After years of darkness, it swept out over Frenchman Bay, steady, patient, finding the dark and refusing it. And down on the rocks, Maggie and Lily stood with their faces turned up and lit, going gold and then shadow and then gold again. I thought of Cora. I thought, God, let her be watching this. I am not a praying man, but I prayed that. Lily comes to the lighthouse most weekends now. She is learning to climb the 91 steps without counting them out loud. And she calls me Grandpa Silas, and she does not yet know any of the story you have just heard. And there will be a day, years off, when I will have to decide how much of it to tell her. Maggie finished her probation. She is steadier than she has ever been. A woman who walked all the way down into the dark and walked back out, which is a thing not many people do. And me, I keep the light. I am an old man, what Damien Vance liked to call a fossil, and I will tell you the truth. There are mornings the word fits, but a fossil is only proof that something lived a long time and left a mark that lasts. I made my peace with the word. I made my peace with most things in the end. Here is what the sea taught me, and what my wife taught me, and what it took me 71 years and one terrible autumn to learn. We are all of us steering through fog. We will all of us run aground. And the only question that finally matters is whether, when someone you love comes to you broken and guilty and afraid in the middle of the night, you will be a lighthouse or you will be a reef. Cora chose the light before she ever knew she would need to. By the grace of God, I learned to choose it too. If this story moved you, stay with me. There are more stories like Silas and Cora's, stories about the long, hard, holy work of forgiving the people we love. Tell me in the comments about a time someone chose to be your lighthouse. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And subscribe, so the next time the light turns, you will be here to see it. Trust the light. It is always turning. It will find you in the dark.